Chapter 49. Good News, Flora Belle. Flora's mother and father entered the kitchen together. Her mother had a cigarette in her mouth. Her mother was smoking. Her father had his arm around her mother's shoulder. This was almost as alarming as seeing her mother smoke. Her mother and father never touched. Good news, Flora Belle, said her father. Really? Said Flora. She never believed it when someone said there was good news. In her experience, when there was good news, people just said what the good news was. If there was bad news and they wanted you to believe it was good news, then they said, good news. And if there really was bad news, they said, good news, Flora Belle. Your mother thinks that it would be wonderful to have the squirrel stay here, said her father. What? Said Flora. Here? With her? And where am I supposed to stay? Here, said her father, with your mother. You, your mother, and the squirrel. That's what your mother would like. Flora looked at her mother. Mom, she said. I would be honored, said her mother. She took a long drag of her cigarette. Her hand was smoking. Why are you smoking? Said Flora. I thought you stopped smoking. Seemed like the wrong time to stop, said her mother. She squinted. I'm under a lot of pressure right now. Speaking of which, I see that the squirrel is typing on my typewriter, where I write. He writes poetry, said William Spiver, not fiction. Let's just have a look-see, said Flora's mother. She walked over to the typewriter and stood looking down at Ulysses and at the words on the page. Let's see what kind of poetry a squirrel writes. Her voice sounded funny still, tinny and far away, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a dark well. Actually, what she sounded like was a robot, someone pretending to be human and doing a lousy job of it. Flora felt a little flicker of fear. Let me just light another cigarette here, said her mother in a robot voice. She lit a new cigarette from the tip of the old one, which was, of course, chain-smoking and very dangerous behavior at the best of times. And this, obviously, was not the best of times. Her mother inhaled deeply. She exhaled. She said, Shall I read the squirrel poetry aloud? Chapter 50, An Incomplete List. Actually, it wasn't poetry. Not yet. So far, it was just a list of words that he wanted to turn into a poem. The first word on this list was jelly. Jelly was followed by giant donut, which in turn followed by sprinkle. The list continued on with these words. Rita, sunny side up, Pascal, giant squid, little shepherdess, vanquished, capacious, quark, universe, blundermeeson, banished. The list ended with the words of Dr. Meesham's goodbye. I promise to always turn back toward you. The words were good words, Ulysses felt. Maybe even great words, but the list was very incomplete. He was just getting started. The words needed to be rearranged, fussed with, put in the order of his heart. All this is to say that when Flora's mother read the list out loud, it didn't sound terribly impressive. Gosh, that's some swell poetry, said George Buckman. Not really, said William Spiver. There's no point in lying to him, even if he is a squirrel. It's actually pretty lousy poetry. But I do like the last part, the part about turning back. That has some emotional heft to it. Well, I think it is just great, said Flora's mother, and I'm glad to welcome another writer into the family. She patted Ulysses on the head, too forcefully, he felt. The pat approached violence. We are going to be one happy little family, said Flora's mother. She gave Ulysses another whack disguised as a pat. Really? Said Flora. Oh, yes, said Flora's mother. There was a knock at the back door. Yoo-hoo! Someone called out. Tootie, thought Ulysses. Tootie, said Flora. Mrs. Tickham, said Flora's mother, do come in. We were just reading some words that the squirrel typed. We were reading some squirrel poetry. William, said Tootie, I've been calling and calling you. I didn't hear you. Well, I must admit that I wasn't calling very loudly, said Tootie. What did Ulysses type? Flora's mother read the list of words again. Tootie put her hand over her heart and said, Oh, those last lines are beautiful, heartbreaking. Those last lines are the only bit of coherence in the whole thing, said William Spiver. I've been inspired by Ulysses to write a little poetry of my own, said Tootie. Ulysses felt himself puff up. He had inspired Tootie. He turned and sniffed his tail. I'd like to read your poetry, Tootie, said Flora. Well, we should have a poetry reading at some point. I'm sure Ulysses would enjoy that. The squirrel nodded. Yes, he would enjoy that. He would also enjoy a bite to eat. Dr. Meesham's jelly sandwiches had been wonderful, but that was a long time ago. He would like to eat, and he would like for Tootie to read poetry to him, and he would like to work on his own poem. Also, he would like for Flora's mother to quit pounding him on the head, which she was doing again now. William, said Tootie, your mother called for you. Did she? Said William Spiver. His voice was squeaky with hope. Really? Did she ask for me to come home? Unfortunately not, said Tootie, but it's dinner time. Come home with me and eat something. Home, thought Ulysses. That's a good word. Dinner is a good word, too. He turned back to the typewriter. He searched for the H. Chapter 51, Possessed. Things were very strange. Her mother insisted that they sit together at the dining room table, the three of them. She also insisted that Ulysses sit in a chair, which was ridiculous, because if he sat in a chair, he wouldn't be able to reach the table. He could sit here with me, said Flora. Oh, no. I want him to feel welcome. I want him to know that he literally has a chair at our table. Her mother had held the chair out, and Ulysses had climbed onto it, and then she slid the chair all the way under the table. It was enough to break your heart, watching his whiskered, hopeful face as it disappeared beneath the tablecloth. If her mother hadn't been acting so strange, Flora would have said something, would have argued more vehemently. But her mother was acting strange. Very, very strange. Not only was her voice robotic, but she was also saying things that she never would have said before, expressing sentiments that seemed to be at odds with the mother Flora had always known. For instance, wanting a squirrel to have a chair at the table. For instance, encouraging Flora to have a second helping of macaroni and cheese. For instance, saying nothing about Flora's potential stoutness as Flora consumed the second helping of macaroni and cheese. It was almost as if her mother were possessed. Terrible things can happen to you had done an issue titled Devils, Divots, and Curses. Apparently, throughout history, people who acted strange had been accused of being inhabited by the devil or a demon, or an alien from outer space. According to Terrible Things, these people were most likely not possessed. Rather, their psyches had been pushed by extraordinary events to the breaking point, and they had experienced a sort of nervous collapse. Flora's guess was that a typing, flying squirrel was more, much more, than Flora's mother's psyche could manage. She had been pushed to the brink. She was suffering from some kind of nervous breakdown. Either that or she was possessed. Of course, Flora's father had been pushed to the brink too, but everything to do with Ulysses had affected him differently. It had cheered him up somehow. Maybe because the holy begumberness of it all had reminded him of Incandesto and Dolores, and also of the possibility of impossible things. "Can't I come live with you?" Flora had said to her mother when he left that night. There's his little head. Had said to her father when he left that night. "Absolutely you can come live with me," said her father, "but your mother needs you now." "She doesn't need me," said Flora. "She said that her life would be easier without me." "I think that your mother has forgotten how to say what she means," said her father. "Plus," said Flora, "she hates Ulysses. I can't live with someone who hates my squirrel." "Give her a chance," said her father. "Right," said Flora. As her father left the house that night, Flora had whispered the words of Dr. Meacham's goodbye to him, and even though there was no way he could hear her, Flora was disappointed when her father didn't turn around back toward her. But anyway, here she was, giving her mother a chance, which as far as Flora could tell meant watching Phyllis Buckman use the candle on the dining room table to light cigarette after cigarette. Flora fully expected that at some point her mother's hair would catch on fire. What did you do when somebody's hair caught fire? It had something to do with a throw rug. You beat them over the head with a throw rug. That was it. Flora looked around the dining room. Did she even own a throw rug? She caught sight of the little shepherdess standing at the bottom of the stairs. Marianne was looking at Flora and her mother with a jaded and judgmental eye. For once, Flora agreed with the lamp. Things were out of control. Her mother said, "Well, it is such a delight to spend time with the members of my family, rodent and otherwise, but my head hurts, and I think that I will go upstairs and rest my eyes for a while." "Okay," said Flora. "I'll clear the table." Lovely. So very thoughtful. After her strange mother climbed the stairs, Flora pulled back Ulysses' chair. He hopped up on the table and considered the plate full of macaroni and cheese. He looked at Flora. "Go ahead," she said. "It's for you." He picked up a single noodle and held it in his paws, admiring it. Watching him, Flora suddenly remembered a panel from the illuminated adventures of the amazing Incandesto. It was a picture of Alfred T. Slipper standing at a darkened window. His hands were behind his back and Dolores was on his shoulder, and Alfred was looking out the window and saying, "I'm alone in the world, Dolores, and I'm homesick for my own kind." The squirrel ate the noodle and picked up another one. There was cheese sauce on his whiskers. He looked happy. "I'm homesick," said Flora. "I miss my father." Ulysses looked up. "I miss William Spiver." Talk about a sentence you never would predict what you'd say. "I even miss my mother," thought Flora. "Or I miss the person she used to be." It was dark outside. Her mother was upstairs. Her father was at the Blixen Arms. William Spiver was next door. The universe was expanding, and Flora Bell was homesick for her own kind. We'll read one more chapter, chapter 52. Is there a word for that? He sat in the window of Flora's room and looked down at the sleeping Flora and then up and out at the lighted windows of the other houses. He thought about the words he would like to add to his poem. He thought about the music at Dr. Meacham's house, the way the voices sounded, singing. He thought about the look on Mr. Claus's face when he went sailing backwards down the hallway. Was there a word for that? Was there a word for all these things together? The lighted windows and the music and the terrified, disbelieving look on a cat's face when he was vanquished? The squirrel listened to the wind blowing through the leaves on the trees. He closed his eyes and imagined a giant donut with sprinkles on top of it and cream inside of it. Or jelly, maybe. He thought about flying. He thought about the look on Flora's face when her mother said that life would be easier without her. What was the squirrel supposed to do with all these thoughts and feelings? Flora let out a small snore. Ulysses opened his eyes. He kept them open until the lights in the windows of the other houses went off, one by one, and the world went dark, except for a single streetlight at the end of the block. The streetlight fizzled into darkness and then flared back to life and then fizzled again. Darkness, light, darkness, light. What, Ulysses wondered, does the streetlight want to say? He thought about William Spiver. He thought about the word banished and the word homesick. He imagined typing the words and watching them appear on the paper, letter by letter. Flora had told him that before she went to sleep that night, that she thought it would be a good idea if he didn't type anything for a while. At least not on her mother's typewriter. Seems to provoke her, she said. I think your typing poems and flying around the kitchen kind of made her have a nervous collapse, or something. She had said this, then she had given him a sad look and closed the door to the bedroom. I closed the door as a reminder, okay? No typewriter. No typing. But what was a closed door to a superhero? It was superhero time. So he manages to get out, down the stairs, and right back to where he wanted. We'll pick up next time at chapter 53, A Sign. I'm going to read a little bit tomorrow during our morning meeting at 1 o'clock. So if you are following along with the read aloud, be ready to listen to some live tomorrow.